huge
All
energy
electric.
hog houses that used as much power because they had every kind of appliance known to man.
Sure. And all electric. I want in on that, by the way. Free electricity, that would be nice.
Do you think that arrangement is still going? I don't think it is.
I know.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Editor, FineHomebuilding.com Editor Rob Wadzak.
Hey, everyone.
Mark Peterson, Fine Homebuilding Senior Editor.
Hello, everyone.
And our amazing producer, Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. Well, gentlemen, it is a pleasure, as always, to see you. And Mark, this is your first regular Fine Homebuilding podcast. Thank you for doing this.
It is. I'm very excited.
So, Rob, how's your basement organization / workshop / kitchen remodel / in-ground swimming pool project going on / pedal power tractor?
I don't know. Actually, I think I'm a little burned out this week. No, really, in reality, I was on the road this week, so my grass is really long right now. I haven't mowed it in over a week, and I haven't touched a single one of my projects. So, not much to report here.
So why were you on the road? What were you doing?
I was going to pick up a car that purchasing from a family member. So seems to be a habit for me lately. I think in the past year and a half, I've gotten 3 cars from 3 separate family members. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
How about you, Jeff? Last we spoke, you were getting ready to tear into reskinning your deck. How's that going?
That's going well. So the demolition has been completed and started the reassembly, just starting with some of the structural stuff, adding some tension ties for the posts because the old ones were just screwed in to the rim joist.
So you're talking about the guardrail posts, am I correct?
Right, correct. Yeah, sorry.
So they weren't up to snuff. They would be too easily pushed over, correct?
Yeah, very much so, because they were notched around the 2x and just drywall screwed in.
Can I assume you're... go ahead, Mark.
Are you switching from wood to a composite, or?
Yes, I am. Yep. So, the old ones it was 18 years old, and they were really bad.
Yeah.
And I don't ever want to do it again.
Are they 16 on center, or what are they?
Yeah, 16 center.
The biggest mistake I've seen people make with those is they'll run a diagonal because that composite it can't span like a regular 5/4 board. So I see they 2 foot on center or 16 on center at an angle, and then they sag in the middle.
So when you do the diagonal or chevron pattern, you're supposed to go to 12 inches, I believe, right?
Yep, on a lot of products, yeah.
Yeah, the one thing I am going to have to sister up some of the joists because they want both ends, whenever there's a butt joint, to be fully supported. So I will have to add a couple of joists for that.
What lengths does that stuff come in, Jeff? Is it all 12s and 16s?
I've got 12s, 16s, and 20s.
20s, huh?
Yeah.
I bet those are light.
Yeah.
Yeah, they get a little... It's like holding a big giant noodle, some of them.
Yeah,
they'll actually touch the ground as you carry them, right?
Oh, yeah.
I've been working on my stairs relocation project. I hung all the drywall, and it was 12 sheets, which includes the underside of the staircase and a 6x5 closet behind it. And you wouldn't think it would be that many sheets of drywall, and you also wouldn't think it would take me 2 days to hang it, but it totally did, coupled with some electrical work as part of it. But 12 sheets of drywall and 12 sticks of corner beads. So it is going to be super fun to finish that.
I saw a photo of that. What room was that?
So that's in the barn, the workshop where I'm in now.
Mm-hmm.
But the space behind me is a large open room that has a TV in it and some sofa, and also the staircase that goes to the upstairs, which has like a loft area in the barn with 3-foot knee walls and sloping ceilings. It's kind of a nice space.
Yeah. Was there live-in trusses? Or is that space built out of the trusses, or is it?
No, I stick framed that, Mark, with 2x8 rafters, I believe it was. Maybe it was 2x10s, 2x8s or 10s. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool.
I'm a big fan of rafters because, like, doing work solo, setting trusses is not an option, but you can definitely put up rafters by yourself if you're got the ridge up there, right?
My neighbors, I'm watching him do trusses by himself, and it's one of those jobs where 3 people make it 10 times faster, not just 3 times faster.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So Patrick, that space there, like, you basically reconfigured your stairs just because you didn't like the way the layout of the space was, right? Is that correct?
That's true.
So, how do you feel like you're getting what you wanted out of it?
Oh, I'm so happy, Rob. It is so much better. Carol and I both think it's far superior to what we had. The space is so much more open feeling, the staircase just really cut it in half basically. And now at the upstairs, with it reconfigured, we have more room up there too. There isn't this weird, like, no man's land between the stairs themselves and the opening, right?
Great.
Yeah, it's cool. There was I don't know if you saw them on the assets page, but I'll put photos for the folks who listen to see what I'm doing, because it's a change. It's a big change. Mark, do we need to introduce you? I mean, I kind of totally glossed over that. We had a long conversation and a pro talk, but I think it's fair to guess that not all of our listeners listen to that show. Do you want to briefly say what you're doing here?
I'll do. What the heck am I doing here? I'm wondering that sometimes myself. No. Just a quick background, not an hour-long monologue. I started out in the construction industry as I was working on an English degree.
Wait, we should first say that you are you replaced Matt Milham as on the editorial team, and I should start off by saying thank you.
That probably makes me the bad guy right away, I suppose, with a lot of our listeners. But yeah, so I was in the construction industry as a siding contractor and a home builder, and in 2008, when all what hit the fan, I finished my English degree and did some writing for trade journals like JLC and some other local ones, and then finally hooked up with a magazine called The Family Handyman. I'm from Minnesota, and their editorial staff, it's a magazine owned by Reader's Digest, or what used to be Reader's Digest, but their editorial staff just happened to be in my backyard in the Twin Cities, Minnesota, so I ended up working for them full-time for about 9 years, handling a lot of their pro content. So I'd write stories on I'd meet with pros and engineers and whoever and do stories on anything from concrete to roofing to cabinets to whatever. So I did that for many years. And then I was freelance copywriter. And then I worked for Marvin Window and Doors, great company. And now I miss the glamour and the glamour of magazine editorial, the editorial world. And so I'm starting with Fine Homebuilding, and I've always been a huge fan. And you talk to anybody about the brand, and most people agree that it's kind of it's one of the preeminent authorities in all things construction. So it's a thrill to be here. I'm very honored and very happy and very excited to work with you guys.
And since you brought it up, the highfalutin lifestyle we live, it would appear that your office is characteristic of this prestigious situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah, as you can see, I'm in the middle of building a house. I moved from Minnesota last spring. I'm in the middle of building a house in Kentucky, right on the Kentucky River, which is a pretty big change. And just next door, long story short, I'm living in a barn dominium. So I'm actually broadcasting from my shop, from my living room, from my parking garage, from my kitchen, etc. So it's quite the glamorous life. How my wife ever agreed to this, I don't know.
Well, that was something we didn't talk about in the Pro Talk, and I should ask you, how are you guys holding up in a building with few windows that's not meant to be living space?
It's, you know what? I hate to say it, it's surprisingly easy, and it almost makes you wonder, because most of my stuff, the vast majority of my stuff, besides my tools, are in storage.
Yeah.
So when you live like this, you kind of wonder, it's like, boy, it seems like I could have got rid of about 3/4 of that stuff before I came down here. It's just amazing. Of course, I fully suspect to get back into the routine of having all the little creature comforts when I get back into the house. And
lots more dusting.
Yeah, it is amazing how what you can get along without.
Well, it is a pleasure to have you on the show and on the team. I'm grateful for your contributions already. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, as always, we heard from some of our great listeners. This comes from George. George is an electrician, as I understand it, and he wrote in regard to Charles's question on how to outfit his Lake Winnipesaukee home to have batteries, so when they had a prolonged power outage, he wouldn't have to run his huge standby generator, which uses tons of fuel, and he only needs a few things to keep going, like the refrigerator and stuff. And so he asked if there was a big battery system similar to Tesla's or what have you that he could run his necessary electronics and appliances. And so George wrote in and he said, Dear Patrick and FHB crew, please let your audience know that in addition to the Generatic product mentioned in episode 384, there are many U.S. manufacturers that make this gear, such as Midnight Solar, Outback Power, Xantrex, now owned by Schneider and others. The questioner needs to do several things. Size the battery bank. This is the most expensive part of any battery system. Kilowatt hours are expensive. 2, select a battery inverter. Size this based on the peak loads, not just the kilowatt hours. Ensure that the battery inverter and the generator can talk to one another, and get an electrician savvy enough to wire the whole thing together. I personally have had great luck working with the people at Outback Power who are very well versed in what type of system your listener needs. Maybe good people to have on the Pro Talk series. Thanks so much, George. Well, George, thanks very much for that. That seems like good advice. Did you guys know there was so many of these like home battery systems? I did not.
So, for a while, all you heard about was the Tesla Powerwall. In fact, it's become almost like the Kleenex, Powerwall is like this.
It shows the real brilliance of Tesla, not that they make these things, but that they're good at telling people about them, right?
Yeah, and so I've been curious about it for a while, but not curious enough to do a whole lot of research on it. But then I just got an email the other day from the company that makes the inverters for my solar panels on my house, and they've got a whole elegant system that works with all of the systems that I already have in my house. And they say that, because they already monitor the weather and the sun conditions just to sort of compare against the solar production. So then, of course, since they're monitoring the weather already, they can even ramp up, make sure the battery packs are topped off for when there's an approaching storm so that you have the maximum amount of backup power. And I think this stuff is it's just on the verge of, I think, becoming way more, diverse and available.
I got a dumb question about these things. The ones I've seen are enormous and look stupidly heavy. How the heck do you get them into the basement?
Well, actually, a lot of the systems, like the one from Enphase, which is the company that makes my inverters, are outdoor enclosures. They're meant to be. They can be mounted on the exterior wall of the house. And I know some people aren't going to want to look at that, and they might build an enclosure around it. But especially from a safety perspective, I like that. I don't really like the idea of having massive lithium-ion batteries in my basement.
The lithium-ion knockoff power tool batteries that I've seen catch fire are pretty freaking dramatic. So I understand your concern. Yeah, it's a scary reaction.
It was a Chevy, not Volt, but one of the big brands had a bunch of recalls because these cars were bursting into flames. And that can't be good for. And I'm a huge fan of electric. If they had an electric truck that was reasonably priced, I'd buy one in a heartbeat.
It's coming, man. It's coming. We heard from the Ford engineer who's working on that, and hey, we need those. Hey.
Yeah. And where I'm building here, I don't know a lot about this. I've visited. I think I did the Generac. I've been to a couple different plants where they make them. It's been a while, but I don't know a lot about the subject. But I kind of designed my house because we're in the middle of nowhere, and we've already had a few power outages. Where my last house, I think I went 8 years without a power outage. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be common here, and I knew that. So it kind of, depending on the budget where I end up, which is going to be much higher than I thought. I'm eventually going to have some solar panels and have some type of backup, and all my utilities and everything's running off electricity. So it's I'll be researching this a lot more in the future. That's for sure.
So what everyone does in this situation, Mark, is buy a standby generator. Why the big batteries versus that?
I don't, those generators use so much fuel. I mean, if you do the math, I mean, they're just crazy. And I would just, and like what I'm living right now, I don't really need all that much power to keep going. So my buildings are going to have a little fireplace. So for heat's not going to be a problem. That's a big draw. If it gets hot outside, big deal. Mm-hmm. So I just don't like the idea of running. I don't remember what they use, but if even natural gas or diesel or whatever.
It's like 2 to 4 gallons of propane per hour. And that would be, an equivalent amount of gas, although gas has less energy density than propane. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you picture even with a little generator, you're probably spending $50 a day, right, to keep a house going. And one thing about these battery backup systems is, I guess if you get a big enough one, you can just run your house. But I mean, how many days you're going to run it for? So it's like the one of the important things to think about is how much of your house do you really need to run when you're in an emergency situation? And as appliances and lighting have gotten more and more efficient, maybe that's a little bit less of a concern than it used to be. But you have to think about that certain heavy-duty devices have big startup surges, so that you got to make sure that the circuitry for a battery backup system can handle those surges, because your output, your regular output, might be lower than the surge output of surge needs of a big appliance. But
yeah, if you have a big, it's just my wife and I here, so that's a whole different scenario. I mean, if you had 3-4 kids at home and they're homeschooling or whatever, there's just a lot more to worry about, I guess. So it really does
elderly folks, like heat deaths, I learned, are like the most common cause of natural phenomenon deaths, which was surprising to me. Like,
I've not to really get on a tangent, but that's kind of what we do here, right? What I learned, I always wondered.
He gets
about
it right
that.
away, Rob.
I've always wondered. So you hear about a heat wave hitting Chicago, and 10, 12, 20 elderly people die, and I've always wondered, why doesn't that happen in Arizona like every single week? And apparently your body at a cellular level gets used to the heat. I mean, it's where those areas where it comes out of nowhere for a week or two that really gets people into trouble. But it's just
your physiological changes your body has to deal with that. My understanding is your blood gets thinner to better cool your skin. Talk about off on a tangent. That was good, Mark. Thank you.
Right. Well, there's more where that came from, believe me.
This comes from Adam. In episode 384, y'all spoke about the idea of an air handler for cooling the second floor of a cape. I have a similar situation with 3 bedrooms and a bath. That's the solution I chose. I have a Mitsubishi ducted mini-split air handler with 1 air intake in the hallway and 4 outputs, 1 in each bedroom. I've included a floor plan and a few pictures of the setup. It's definitely a pricey option, but should be way more efficient and a lot less ductwork eating up rooms if you could get it where you need it. The ducted unit looks after bedrooms 1, 2, 3, and the bathroom. And there's a mini split head in the master bedroom to do it and the master bath. The heating and shoulder seasons will be looked after by the heat pump, but in the winter, I have hydronic heat in the floors. I would love if anyone has insight on heating an existing basement with hydronic heat. I love the idea of keeping the heating loops in the floor, but I'm not willing to rip up and insulate the floor and re-pour it. Currently, the walls have closed cell spray foam with a continuous vapor barrier on the existing slab. I feel like my options are 2-inch R8 to 10 foam, then flooring with a couple radiators or hydronic flooring systems like Roth Radiant panel systems, then flooring on top. Both are around 2 inches tall. The basement is 7-foot ceiling height, so I'm a little concerned with the head height. Do you think the in-floor heat is viable with this amount of insulation, or are the radiators a better idea? The only other option I can think of is radiant panels on the ceiling, but I can't find any info on that and have no idea if that's viable. Lastly, I'd love to avoid putting down subfloor on top of the foam as the slab isn't very level, and I don't want to have to drill anchors through the vapor barrier. Thoughts? Thanks for all your help. It's been invaluable in building / renovating my family's new home. Adam from Waterdown, Ontario. Okay, so people love hydronic floors, right? Like it's totally just what people are into. It's a pretty expensive way to heat, I would say, but whatever. What's that thing? Warm board, right, Rob?
Warm board? You're talking about one of the panels that you can run the tubes in, right?
Yeah. Have you heard of this stuff, Mark, Jeff?
No, I haven't.
So it's like plywood with a shiny foil skin and then routed into both are grooves for the tubing. And maybe the aluminum layer is continuous. I don't remember exactly how it's configured, but anyway, and then you just beat the tubing into these wood panels and they take the place of subfloor. And that might be a good option for you, Adam, but it doesn't solve the insulation problem. And where you are, I'm guessing that matters quite a bit.
I wonder, I mean, it all depends on the size, but the floor, the height, the ceiling height is really a concern. When you start dropping below 7, then you lose, well, even at 7, ceiling fans and just lights, and it's just,
it feels weird.
Kind of wonky. Yeah. And it feels, a little claustrophobic. Maybe maybe a couple sections of, electric heat under tile or something maybe is an option. If it's just if you don't need to do the whole thing, if it's just one particular area or room or bathroom or whatever, that might be an option as well.
I agree. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned the radiant heat panels in the ceiling that people have talked about over the years. Hydronic is probably complicated and not common, so it's going to be hard to find a solution for that for radiant like ceiling or wall panels. The electric panels are readily available but expensive to run and not super cheap on their own. It's like he's already got hydronic heating. It seems like the simplest thing would be to put a couple of sections of baseboard on another loop in there.
That's what I'm saying. Or radiators. I like the look of radiators better than baseboard radiators, real ones. And maybe that's the kind of thing you go to the salvage yard and buy an old cool one, right? And make it part of the aesthetic. And if you don't like the look of radiators, there's a good upcoming feature in Fine Homebuilding magazine on how to build an enclosure for them. So that's coming. What do you? Yeah, I don't think the in-floor is going to be an option, honestly. If you want to maintain your 7-foot ceiling height, that's just not going to do it. Do you have any thoughts,
down
Jeff?
Here when I first started getting.
Go ahead, Mark.
When I first started getting bids down here, I thought about doing radiant floor, and they all just looked at me like I was crazy. It's not very popular here, just because of the heating.
People
cycle.
want air conditioning, right? Yeah. So. You guys, didn't see this,
I'm not quite
Mark,
sure I follow what he was saying about the not wanting subfloor over the insulation. He's going to put run flooring right over his rigid foam insulation, and then he's worried that the floor is uneven, so he doesn't want to have to drill down to put the subfloor in. It sounds kind of similar to what I was dealing with in my basement, where it's like you got some uneven floors and put some, whether you're just putting insulation down or you're putting insulation between sleepers. In that case, there's no reason not to have a floating floor if you do want to have a subfloor down in there. You just shim it up where it's wonky, and kind of run with it.
This was demonstrated in a feature that Andy Engel did years ago for Fine Homebuilding, and we can put that on the podcast page. It's what amounts to floating subfloor.
Yeah,
right?
He basically did 2 layers of subfloor alternating so that's what held the subfloor together rather than having sleepers or fastening it directly to the ground, which, it's a little extra money in subfloor, but it's...
But it has to work, right? It's like money spent for something that doesn't work is not... And then you're going to spend it again.
For sure.
Do you, Jeff and Rob, remember the pictures of the horribly failed tile that came from the Southwest?
Yes.
Yeah, that was some pretty horrible stuff. So we heard from Shaughnn, who works for Ardex Tile and Stone Installation Products. Hi, Patrick. While listening to episode 386 and hearing about Mike's problem tile floor, I found that it was the perfect opportunity to draw attention to the Tile Council of North America's handbook for ceramic, glass, and stone tile installation. Specifically, the tile failure featured in the podcast episode could have been mostly avoided had the installer followed TCNA recommendation EJ171 for expansion joints. A proper ANSI 118.4 or better thin-set mortar and adequate coverage might also be in play here. And the telegraphed wandering crack through the field of the porcelain does indeed suggest some amount of movement in the slab. It is possible that this movement is occurring at a control joint in the slab, though, in which case we refer back to TCNA recommendation EJ171. An An uncoupling membrane would not, as was suggested in the episode, protect this installation from tenting on its own. Expansion joints in an open perimeter are the first line of defense against tenting. The uncoupling membrane lends itself after those precautions have been taken. So I asked Shaughnn how he knew anything about this stuff, and he said, "Hey, Patrick, I was a tile installer for 32 years before becoming a manufacturer's rep for Ardex. While an installer, I was also an administrator over at the John Bridge Tile Your World Forum. I love the trade and really enjoy helping people noodle through their projects, so the forum was a nice way to decompress after 12-hour days on my knees. Tenting is commonplace. It's most often experienced in commercial or production installations because the pace is high and the level of training is low. There's also the factor that the required expansion joints are usually unwelcome by designers, owners, and contractors. The telegraphed crack is another separate issue, though. As was mentioned, I'd be curious to see the backs of those tiles to check coverage, notch size, and to see if latent contaminants have been left on the slab prior to spreading thinset." Well, Shaughnn, thanks for that mini lesson in tile setting. That's pretty awesome, right?
Yeah, so he mentions... Oh, go ahead.
I saw photos of that, and I've never seen anything quite like that. I mean, unless it was a flood and a freeze-thaw thing, I've never seen anything like that. I mean, really, when the basics of it is one of two things happened: the concrete shrank or the tiles grew. I mean, it kind of boils down to that, isn't it?
Well, the original person mentioned in that last podcast that this seems to be a common thing.
This
for
builder,
that builder
has this problem at least more than once.
That was a great response too. Unbelievable.
You know, the one thing we talked about is how expansion joints are important, and in a small room you don't have to worry about as much. You just sort of leave gaps at the edges that get hidden by baseboard or whatever. And as he pointed out, people don't typically like to see an expansion joint in the middle of a tile floor. So, and it takes extra thought. And then, of course, the expansion joint in the concrete is a possible concern too. Maybe they didn't even bother putting any there.
It was some messed up stuff. All I got to say is, if I'd have bought that house, I'd have been losing my mind.
Well, and the builder, the response was hilarious. Everyone else going through this, so quit your whining. It's like, what? What kind of response is that?
I know. It's like, how common is this?
It wasn't cosmetic either. You can't walk across that floor without
you cut your feet open, down. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a guy from up your way, Mark.
I know Bemidji well. Yeah.
Where is Bemidji?
It's probably about 2 hours north, almost directly north of the Twin Cities. So it's probably halfway up the state, I suppose. But it's still, that's where people go from the Twin Cities. That's where that area is kind of where they go on a vacation in the summer.
Okay, very good. Doug writes, "Dear FHB crew, first off, I want to say thank you for your dedication to making, in my view, the best podcast out there on building and building science. I always appreciated Matt's input on topics, and I'm very sad to hear that he is leaving. I'm sure you all do a great job filling in for him with all the building code details and building science geekery of wall assemblies and venting." Okay, now for my question. I'm working on restoring my home that was built in 1915 up here in northern Minnesota, climate zone 7. This old house has been testing my resolve since we purchased it almost 2 years ago, with surprise and surprise behind every wall and beneath every floor. My most recent project is a large covered front porch, which is unusual in homes in our area, but it happens to be our favorite feature of the house. I'm currently working on repairing the floor rot and reinforcing the floor joists to reduce deflection. As you can see from the pictures, the porch is open to the elements on the sides and allows in rain and snow. I'm planning to add floor drains to prevent standing water while the water doesn't drain through the porch fur flooring. My main concern is venting below the porch, which is where all the moisture ends up and now seems to stay trapped. I'm thinking this has to have contributed to the floor rot I'm repairing now. The porch is skirted with vertical boards that have a 1/8-inch gap between them. Can I add vents to encourage airflow underneath? Should I consider a vent fan that is either always on or has a humidistat? Thanks very much for your help. Doug. Who wants to go first?
I was looking at the photos, and when I see something like that, the first thing I think of is you got to check the grade underneath the porch, because if the water that does get through, if it's if it's pooling under there, running back towards the house, it's obviously going to stay wet under there much, much, much longer than if it was sloped properly. So that would be the number one thing to check out. The other thing I thought is, you can get a decent moisture meter now for about $25. So he's got some holes already drilled in there. I'd be interested after, a day after a rain to reach my hand under there and poke the bottom side of those boards and just to see, maybe it's not a problem. Maybe you're worried about nothing. Maybe it's just fine. And the other thing I thought, looking at the photos and given the fact that he's replacing boards with new boards, I would highly, highly recommend finishing the bottom side of before you set those down, because those are not going to be the same quality as what was originally put in there.
One of my dear friends that I worked at with Habitat said that porches and decks are what keep carpenters in business, right? Because they always need work, and especially homes of this era, right? This thing did really well for 100 plus years, right?
Yeah.
And as Mark points out, the quality of lumber that we have today is nowhere going to be near as good as this vertical grain Doug fir that they almost certainly used on this floor that was hundreds of years old when they cut those trees. So you're not going to get that. We always tell folks to put a layer of polyethylene under porches to stop the ground moisture from evaporating and, then sitting on the underside of the deck boards. And I love porch flooring with tongue and groove boards, but I would sure be tempted to, have gapped boards, or at minimum, these boards should be sloped toward away from the house so that water that does get on the porch flooring has a chance to run off. And that's a detail that old carpenters knew, but it seems to have been forgotten over the years. I don't know that folks are still putting in some slope on their porch floors. Jeff or Rob, do you guys have any thoughts?
Yeah, the one thing about this porch, and you see a lot of these porches in the early 20th century houses, a covered porch with a knee wall that goes right down to the decking. And the really well-built ones will have some sort of a detail or even a just very barely noticeable gap. Sometimes they'll actually embellish it and actually make it a trimmed-out detail, but sometimes it's just you basically keep the bottom edge of that little knee wall up off the decking so that you have drainage going underneath there. And I'm sure that contributed to this, because even if it's not a drainage issue, just that sort of dark, damp space in there where the ends of those deck boards terminate is always a concern. Basically anytime you build a porch, whether it's covered or not, and it's out of wood, it's like you just have to pay attention to getting water out and away as quickly as possible.
And we can't really see what the skirt boards on the outside are, if they are the same on the inside. If they're just 1x2s or even 1x3s and an 1/8 inch gap in between them, that's you add that up, that's actually not a bad amount of airflow. So it's
and
one
the
of those
question
things
is how much airflow is there going to really be, right? No matter what you do with that. I think the fan is completely wacky. Don't do that.
No, and a dehumidifier is not going to do anything.
This comes from Larry. This is kind of a long one, folks, so bear with me. Hey, podcast crew, love it. Listening to it gives me the motivation to keep working on remodeling my 1925 bungalow, which is currently in year 5 of an originally projected 1-year construction project. So much for my estimating skills, or lack thereof. The stairs to my enclosed back porch need to be refinished, as the stain applied by the prior owners wore off long ago. I have a couple of quick questions. 1, would you recommend paint or stain? I have no preference other than wanting a finish that will last as long as possible. 2, is there anything I could apply to the finish to provide a non-skid surface? Although the stairs are mostly protected by the roof overhang, snow and ice do accumulate at times during our cold northern Illinois winters. My 13-year-old dog has trouble navigating the stairs, and I'd like to do whatever I could to prevent her from slipping on them. Can I add sand or a gritty substance to the paint or stain? Could I apply non-slip treads to the stairs after refinishing them? Other possibilities? What caulk would you recommend between the treads and risers? I'm assuming a waterproof silicone. I realize this question is not about air sealing, roof construction, or blower door test, but hopefully you can help me out. Appreciate any advice you might have. Okay, so first off, paint or stain. Let's go around the room here. Jeff. Time's up. Wrong. Time's up. Mark.
At the magazine, this was the most common question that we got by far at the family.
I knew this was going to be good, right up your wheelhouse, because yeah,
and it's the hardest question it's the strangest thing, because you'll take one stain or paint and put it on one deck, and the neighbor could be the same stuff, and it works on one and not on the other because there's so many variables. The species of the wood, the amount of the sun, the age of the wood, what was put down first. I mean, it's super hard. When people would ask this question, what I'd often say, and there's kind of a cop-out, I admit, but sometimes it's helpful to go look at your neighbors and see what they've done. Because sometimes the houses are built about the same age, and sometimes they're built by the same builders with the same materials. And if you can't find what works, you can often find out what doesn't work. Yeah. So and plus you get to meet your neighbors, and maybe they'll give you a beer. Who knows?
Maybe they'll come help you stain your deck.
Yeah, even better.
I like stained wood. I do. I like seeing character of the grain and defects through the coating. But, I don't think stain, especially semi-transparent stains, are right for outdoor use because of the UV. It doesn't hold up as well as something with more pigment in it. So I don't know.
And he does. It looks like it's almost bare wood, so I think he does have a little more options than if they were already painted. I mean, your options are pretty limited.
To answer about the slip resistance, like I've seen the grippy tapes. I don't think they look great, but what I think is better is you can add these traction additives to any paint. It's like it's sold in the paint department, and it's made for this very purpose. You mix it in with the paint at their recommendations, and it just gives it some tooth so you don't slip on the painted surface.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are common. And the spark. Oh, go ahead, Rob.
No, just guys. It's usually just a little bag of something resembling sand, and it's like one pouch per gallon, and you add it in there. Obviously, that might make it a little bit harder to scrape the ice off in the winter, but it's kind of a give and take there.
And I was thinking, the stick-on pads. I've actually seen some that hold up pretty well, but because that is probably going to be shoveled and scraped, I would just make me a little concerned that those you'd be peeling up, with a shovel or scraper or whatever, you'd be peeling up those stick-ons.
Yeah, and then you really have a tripping hazard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But back to the paint question there. I mean, really, no matter what you choose, the key is going to be prep, as with any painting project, and buying high quality materials. So go to your local high quality building supply store. Don't just buy the cheapest stuff you can find at the big box store, and get recommendations from them. And if those boards are soaking wet, you're going to want to keep them. You want to dry them out before you put any paint on them. You want to scrape and sand them. And they look like you could probably just with an Orbital sander and some 80 grit get them down to bare wood.
And you have to anyway, because you have to get I forget what the chemical situation that happens to wood fibers, but when they're baked with the sun, the paint will not stick to that. It is very friable. Do you know what that's called, Mark? I forget what that's called.
No, you know what? There was a guy called Mr. Cedar at the Cedar Institute that I'd had dealings with before, but it was, just stain as well. He said if you leave a cedar deck out for, I forget what it was, in the sun for like 4 or 5 months, the effectiveness of the stain is reduced by like 40 or 60%. It was a huge amount. And the damage that the UV rays does is really incredible.
This is something people don't realize when they put up like prime trim, right? And then they wait a year to paint the house, and they don't sand that, or and it's ripe for failure. The paint peels off in sheets, in my observation.
The other big question he asked was caulking, and that was the second most popular question. Which caulking should I use?
I'm glad you came back to that. Go ahead.
For exterior, there's all sorts of hybrids are great. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of silicones outside because they get dirty. The fun
you can't
joke
paint
about
them.
No, they have paintable silicone.
Yeah,
it's. I'm a big fan of just a straight up polyurethane exterior caulk, like a quad or a Balcom or something like that. And in an area where it's going to get dinged up too, the running joke is nothing sticks to silicone, even silicone. So if you get it dinged up with foot traffic or whatever, and you want to redo it, if there's been silicone down previously, it's really tough to make it look nice.
Yep. And if we're just talking about treads and risers here, and there's nothing to protect underneath, I'd even be inclined to just not caulk it at all.
Yeah, that's my vote. Let the water get out of there, and it's less of a maintenance problem, right?
That's a great point.
Larry goes on to, in his email about another subject we've talked about, on a totally unrelated topic. You talked about all-electric homes in a few podcasts recently, and I thought you might find it interesting. My dad built our small 3-bedroom ranch house in northwestern Ohio in 1955, and one of its interesting features was radiant heat embedded in the popcorn plaster ceiling. I never gave it a second thought growing up in the house, but my older brother, a retired HVAC tech, has told me that it is a very efficient mode of heating, especially since we also heated the full basement. Apparently, we paid a set monthly amount to the utility, and once a year the electric company billed us for the difference between used and paid. My brother indicated that we often didn't pay anything that month. It was one of the first gold medallion ready kilowatt homes in our area. Here's a link regarding the program, and we'll put that on the podcast page. I recall that it was an even, albeit dry heat. Most rooms had their own round Honeywell thermostat. There was a ton of fiberglass bat insulation in the attic, and maintenance was obviously non-existent. By the way, the walls were also tongue and groove knotty pine throughout most of the house. Why? I have no idea. But I don't think I've ever been in a regular home since that had knotty pine paneling, excepting a cabin in the woods. Just a bit of history for your enjoyment. Have you guys heard of this program? That's pretty amazing.
Yes, it's kind of crazy. You know what the whole deal is with that kilowatt house? It's basically when power was becoming more prevalent across the electric grids was becoming more prevalent across the country, and rise in volume was running the prices down. All of these utility companies weren't making as much money on power generation, and they started making houses that were sort of the gold standard of what the American dream should be, which is basically these huge energy hog houses that used as much power because they had every kind of appliance known to man.
Sure. And all electric. I want in on that, by the way. Free electricity, that would be nice.
Do you think that arrangement is still going? I don't think it is. That was very interesting, Larry. Thank you very much. I should say Larry is from Evanston, Illinois.
I had to read that one twice. I'm like, wait a second. It wasn't solar. It wasn't bad. It's like you just got it for free just because everything was electric. That's not a bad deal.
It's not a bad deal. And like you said, there's like with resistance heating, like what is there to go wrong or fix or maintain? It's like it is. Yeah. That's pretty bulletproof. This comes from Steve. A few years ago, we installed a laminate floor on a plywood subfloor in our 24 by 36 second floor room. Now that we've used the space a while, we want to add a wall to create a closet. I know the best approach is to cut out the laminate and make a channel for the bottom plate. The big downside to this is it will create a lot of fine dust as I cut the flooring. There's a lot of furniture and this side of the room has no windows. I'd rather cut a 4-inch round hole in the laminate every 2 feet than use 3-inch round pieces of 3/4 inch thick plywood to create platforms for the bottom plate to sit on. This would allow the laminate floor to move and controlling the dust would be far easier. I'm not seeing any downsides to this approach, but maybe you guys would. Thanks, Steve. Well, I'm going to say this is brilliant, but I don't know if it's a bad idea, but it seems like it's a good idea.
I mean, it certainly seems like a quick and easy way to do the job.
Yeah.
You were talking about a closet wall here, so it's not a load-bearing wall. I mean, I guess I'd be okay with that, but I'd also, with the tools that I have, I'd probably just lay down a block of wood and take my multi-tool and just run it along there and cut through the laminate without.
How many blades do you think you'd go through, Rob, to cut a closet's worth of plate out of a laminate floor? Well, I guess it depends on
how big of a closet we're talking here. Yeah, I guess it would be it certainly is annoying to cut long lengths with those multi-tools. But if you got a good blade, it's not that big a deal. Or you just take some dust collection measures with your saw. I mean, you're always going to kick up dust with a circular saw, but.
Yeah, you know what? I don't see a downside either, really. But for some reason, I'm against it, and I don't know exactly why. First of all, laminate's not that hard to pull up. So if you were and if you're flexible on the size of the closet, you can make it so, especially if the planks run the way with the closet, you could just kind of
take those out and put them back.
Yeah, cut the ends, and then that hold the length of it, you're just pulling it up and redoing it. So I would probably figure out a way to cut it, I guess. And even if the planks run the other way, you're really only going to have to do one. You're not have to do all three sides, because you can pull the planks up to the point where unless you really, really have to be within fractions of an inch of where it needs to go. But if you plan it right, you might not have to cut that much.
Jeff, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a kind of a cool idea, but I don't know that it's going to save much dust cutting all those holes versus, pulling up some of those planks, or, cutting and pulling up some of those laminate floors.
I can tell you what not to do. Don't get your circular saw and try and adapt your own dust collection system with a Mountain Dew bottle, because I can tell you that doesn't work at all.
No,
I've definitely had people on a job site follow me with a shop vac right behind my circular saw, and that does a decent job.
Okay.
And the thing about that with a oscillating multi-tool is the collection area is small. Unlike if you're spinning a 4-inch hole saw, how the heck are you going to contain all that?
Right. And maybe the local rental center for $25. You can go rent it. I mean, if the dust is really a concern, you can go rent a fiber cement saw with the newest fiber cement saws are pretty solid at dust collection.
And I think, if you have a window anywhere in that space, if you get, a box fan or a window fan and, blow it out, the negative pressure is going to get that dust out of the space before it has a chance to settle on it, hopefully. But I've been impressed with how a fan in a remodeling space controls dust.
Mm-hmm. And when I do use a shop vac, what works well, just go get some cheap hose. I'm not a big fan. I mean, those filters, unless you get a really high end $800 shop vac, I like to run a hose on the output and just point it right out the nearest window. Yeah,
that's a good idea.
Should put that in as a reader tip, right, in the magazine.
Yeah, I think I've run that before and got some slack from the shop vac people saying, "Oh, they're not designed to do that." It's whatever.
Or the EPA that you're blowing lead dust out there on the lawn, right?
Yeah, right. That's true too.
This is my own question. I'm just going to be honest about it. So I recently listened to Mason Lord interview Gary Katz for Fine Homebuilding's 40th anniversary, and if our listeners haven't had a chance to check that out, I would tell you to do that, because it was very thought-provoking. Gary's a smart guy, and I can think a few people have done more to elevate the craft of finished carpentry. Listening to what he says is worth doing. But at the beginning of the interview, he talked about having this feeling of inadequacy because he's a carpenter, because trade work is simply not valued in this country, along with many other types of important jobs. And this was a sentiment his mom had, right? And you can imagine how potentially damaging that would be. Gary's words really stuck with me, and what he said was troubling. I'd like to ask our readers if they have had similar feelings of inadequacy owing to their jobs, and do you still feel that way? And if not, how did you get through it? And then in our conversation, you kind of talked about this too, Mark. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, when I listened to that podcast, and that was I highly recommend everyone do listen to it. I felt the exact same way. And maybe, some of it was maybe just on me, but you would always get a sense if you're out with other people. It's like, oh, what do you do? It's like, oh, I'm a, siding contractor or builder or whatever. You could just kind of see or maybe perceive something in their eyes saying, oh, let me talk to the next guy who's a little more interesting, who might do something and I don't know. I mean, Gary's done a lot to help, and we do too with Craft America. See how I did that? I'm already using the we.
Good.
Keep craft alive, but I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know if there's going to be I know there's not a quick solution, but it really is. I mean, maybe it's just saying it to the point of ad nauseum that the trades is a fantastic career. You can make great money. It can be very satisfying. It's not what a lot of people think it is, especially nowadays with the safety tools and the dust collection systems and just the care we take to make the work environment better than it was. Even just the behavior on a job site nowadays is probably not the same as it was 25, 30 years ago.
Let's hope.
Yeah, but I absolutely agreed. I could totally relate to what he was saying. So yeah, it was a great episode, and I highly recommend people listen to it.
Have you ever felt that way, Ron?
Oh, it's a big part of why I'm in the job I am now, because I went to high school where almost everybody I knew was going to college, and I ended up going to college and getting a college degree and got out of school and realized pretty quickly that I just loved working with my hands and was involved in crafts and trades from day one, right when I got out of school. And, halfway through my 20s, I just felt like I was doing something wrong. I was wasting my time, or I wasn't like living up to my potential because of what I had been told all those years in high school and college about, go to college, get a college degree. That's the way to be successful in life. And I learned a lot when I was a tradesperson that allowed me to do the job I do now, which is editing information to help other people learn how to do what I've done in the past and what other tradespeople do. And I've actually gone back. I don't know if you know this, Mark, but like I was at Fine Homebuilding for a while and went back into the trades for a while. And so a lot of our staff have done that over the years because we realize how fulfilling it is to be doing a craft and to be solving those problems for people every day. And I don't feel there's any difference. In fact, I actually prefer in some instances to be doing that, solving problems for people, solving creative problems, fixing things, building things from scratch. There's just a lot of satisfaction that comes from it. But when I was early on in my life, I was basically conditioned to think otherwise, and I'm thankful that I've come around. And I think you're right, Patrick. I think we just need to talk about it enough. I think people need to hear it, that it's just as valuable and just as fulfilling. I mean, really, any job you do can be fulfilling and valuable if you put the right effort and attitude into it.
What do you think about this, Jeff? You recorded that with them.
Yeah, no, I agree. That was an outstanding episode, and he's such a smart man and so thoughtful. But yeah, no, I it's very difficult to change the attitude of society. And I understand that other places it's not the same. In Europe, that the trades are valued much more highly than they are in the U.S. And
we learned from Patrick, though, the stereotomist, that the wages aren't any better, sadly, which troubled me because, going along with self-respect and being respected by society largely goes, includes getting paid for what you do, right? Adequately and enough to make a living and buy health insurance or whatever, right?
What Rob said about being satisfying, I think part of it, what I noticed, one of the most things I've noticed when I went from kind of a trades to an office environment was how frustrating it was when there was a problem and how long it took to fix it. Because in the trades, it's if you and I are working together, Patrick, and we had to frame a stairway or whatever, if I saw you doing something dumb, I'd say, Patrick, you can't do it that way. That's just totally wrong. And you would say, hey, Mark, you're a knucklehead. This is the way it has to be done. And it had to be done. I mean, if we said we were going to get done by Wednesday, it has to be done by Wednesday. And it's satisfying to get things done like that. And, you get disagreements, but everyone at the end has to come together because it's just not, and there's certain things in office trades where there's just not a clear boundary of what it is that you have to get done, and it takes so long to get it done. Or whose job it is, right? Or whose job it is. It's so clear when you're on a job. It's like, you need to do this before you leave today or leave on, this job site. So it's just really, and that said, though, I don't think we should, I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think a combination, get a 2-year associate arts degree and get into the trades. And there's nothing wrong with that either. I mean, I think they both work off each other. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
I also think that people who are feeling that way and who have never done anything else but a job in the trades, I think there's so many other things they can do other than like saying, oh, I need a different career, I need a college degree. There's so many other things. Like it could be just being involved in some organization where you're teaching other people in your region or your community. Or I, I I think we're hopefully moving towards the point where people aren't conditioned to think quite as thoroughly that the trades are no longer. I mean, at least in our circles, it seems like that message is getting out there loud and clear. So as long as people are doing stuff that makes them happy, that's satisfying, that's getting, putting food on the table, I just hope that a lot of people aren't like thinking the grass is greener on the other side, because
yeah. And I did that all the time. I would be out working on a roof, hot roof, or it'd be miserable rain or unbelievably cold, and I'd hear somebody on the radio complaining about some meeting they had to go to, and I'd be like, "Oh, boo-hoo, meeting, you should be at where I'm at." But then when I had to start going to meetings, oh man, I was not. I'm like, give me a day in the sun any day of the week.
I think
it's not always greener. Yeah, it's not always greener.
What's nice about doing trade work is you have a lot of control over what you do. You're making the choice of where to start on the project. You're deciding the methods, and that's very satisfying, because if you really know what you're doing, you don't have to ask somebody who probably doesn't, right?
Yeah.
I heard today there was a young man who was an HVAC technician on a project I was visiting, and he was probably in his 20s. So what I do now when I see folks like of this age group, I say, how did you learn your craft? And he says, I just started working one day for a company, and that I've been working my way up. And he's like, I love it. I was like, I hate to do the same thing every day. This satisfies that need of me to work on different projects every day. He's like, I might be working on a townhome, I'm working on a condo, I'm working on a boiler, I'm working on an HVAC system, I'm installing ductwork, insulating it. And I think there's a lot of people who would just be miserable in an office environment or a job where you're doing the same thing every day. And that's one thing that trade work allows you, is to really have a diverse collection of experiences, even on a daily basis.
Rob, I was curious, when you were growing up as a teenager or preteen, were you in the garage putzing around, tearing stuff apart and building tree forts?
Yeah, I mean, my dad couldn't afford to pay people to do work on anything. So he was one day he'd be putting a head on an engine in a car. Another day he'd be, insulating part of the house, or putting up a roof on the garage. And I saw that from early on, and we had this big 4-car garage in the back of our house, and it's full of old junk and tools and things. And I think I was about 8 years old, 9, 10 years old, when I just started picking up old bikes by the side of the road and taking them apart, figuring out how they work, putting them back together, and built a little clubhouse in one back corner of the garage out of stuff we found.
Garbage, right? It was always like garbage.
Mm-hmm. So yeah.
I think there is that. I think there is that. I think there is an innate. I mean, I don't think you can take 10 people and have all 10 of them be happy in the trades. That's just never going to happen. But if there's 3 of them that really, it's almost like and I think it is. I think the people who are happy in the trades probably grew up like you, Rob, and me, just tearing stuff apart, putting stuff together. But the problem is we need to capture a high percentage of those people in the trades, because it isn't everybody. Not everybody would be. I mean, can't say that either. It's like, oh, go to the trades. Well, you know what? That's not right for everybody either. So,
well, and I think that's with any line of work. You're going to find people who are there because that's where they want to be, and you're going to find people who are there because they thought it would be a good job, or somebody said, hey, why don't you try this out? And so,
I think it's fair to say a lot of those folks, it was the last stop, right? And that's what they always told us. The guidance counselors and the science teachers are like, oh yeah, if you want to do trade work, well, that's for folks who really don't have many options, right? And that's so unfair. It's so unfair. But there is a percentage of those folks there. We've all met them.
And you know what? The other thing I wonder is, I've thought about. So my youngest son is a computer programmer, or a computer engineer degree. A lot of the the itches that can be scratched in that realm is kind of a similar deal. They're kind of problem solving. They're working out puzzles. So I think there's technological degrees that kind of scratch those same, that weren't there 20 years ago, that maybe perhaps some of these people are going into that. Because my guess is some of these computer guys, if if that wasn't an option in school 20 years ago, they'd be in the shop building something.
Yeah.
So I think we might be losing some to that group, and it is what it is, I guess, at that point.
But on your note about how there's there are, it seems like every year there are new trades or new lines of work or new businesses because of the way technology and the way we build things has changed. And so it's like, there's that whole new trade of being into solar installation or doing energy audits, or it's like you're doing the same kind of work in the same kind of environments, but it also gets you into the more technical stuff. So you can kind of find these things now that bridge a bunch of different realms.
So those of you out here who are listening to the show, please write in with your feelings of inadequacy. We'll be sure to share them with all of our listeners.
We didn't talk about women either. There's probably a lot of women out there who would love to do to get a job in the trades. It's just feel intimidated. Not only is it the regular people looking down on it, it's the whole men versus women environment too. So that's
it's
I
not
think
exactly
that's gotten a lot better.
welcoming.
That's gotten a lot better, but it's not easy, and that's another obstacle for sure.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Mark, Rob, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building. Thanks very much for listening.